18th-century London was a city between worlds. It was packed with people from all walks of life. Ordinary people worked and played in ways that they always had, but crime became a growing issue. In this environment, a new group of men emerged as self-appointed authority figures who viewed urban people and their festivity as problematic. They formed groups such as the Societies for the Reformation of Manners and began an active campaign to rid London of the people and gatherings they found morally unacceptable. This was done in a time before the modern police state, and you might be surprised by the techniques they used to control the rapidly modernizing city. The city of London and its surrounding counties were central to a country that was increasingly becoming a world power. While establishing British dominance overseas in early imperial colonies, the British prided themselves on their advanced commercial skills, culture, intellect, and their overall brand of civilization. However, the realm's proud monarchs lived in palaces that bordered an almost medieval city, struggling with the effects of overcrowding and early industrialization. A new class of prosperous middling people emerged in London, profiting from commercial venues and looking down on the city's poorer residents. Overrun, dimly lit, and poverty-stricken parts of the city coexisted with fashionable shops and the new townhomes emerging in the early 18th century. Polite society began to worry that the capital's appearance didn't reflect the orderly and proper British identity that the elite of the era deemed appropriate. This anxiety became especially apparent every summer when fair season began. Starting with Mayfair in late May and continuing with Lady Fair or Southwark Fair in mid-September, the city's main thoroughfares were overrun by medieval-style markets, sideshow entertainment, unlicensed theatrical shows, temporary venues for drinking, gambling, feasting, and many opportunities for sexual experimentation. Mannered people were horrified, but the city's fairs were difficult to abolish. Not only were they traditions that, in some cases, dated back thousands of years, but they were also protected by royal and civic charters. Urban developers eager to replace these festive spaces with polite new neighborhoods and entertainment venues couldn't easily displace centers of festivity and informal markets. City and county councils passed regulations attempting to limit the days of London's festivals to their chartered days, but without a reliable and formal police force, enforcement of these restrictions was nearly impossible. So how could behavior be modified? Urban authorities began to focus their attention on spreading ideas about polite and Christian behavior. The challenge, though, was getting people to conform to these new ideas, or even to prefer alternative forms of entertainment. Monarchs and city authorities might have called urban festivity ungodly, but by the late 1690s, a new generation was in place that didn't particularly fear passive threats or the consequences implied in royal proclamations. Social order, until this time, had depended on people respecting their monarchs, city leaders, and church officials, but young people around 1700 belonged to a generation with plenty of reasons to doubt the divine rights of the monarchs. They were asked to be moral and live up to ideals of proper Christian behavior, but the history they knew was full of stories about division between Christians who fought over which religious doctrines were true and which leaders should be respected. Monarchs also proved to be replaceable. Parliament had, during the 17th century, displaced one monarch through execution, established a republic, and then invited a monarch back with restrictions, only to oust another monarch because he was Catholic and establish a new royal line. All of this bred uncertainty in the divine order, once believed to be infallible. Ordinary people had become more focused on surviving and shaping their own lives rather than worrying about the latest religious or social expectations. Into this uncertain environment emerged a newly powerful class of middling people, the precursors to the middle class. Many of these men profited from their entrepreneurial skills, found work with the expanding central government, or held powerful positions within the state's church. They sought influence and power but lacked the aristocratic titles that would have secured their place in society. Wealth improved their lives, but they couldn't buy their way into England's existing elite. So these wealthy middling people established their own ideals and practices, which they believed distinguished them from the lower orders. New manners and codes of conduct emerged, and those who read the right journals, books, or attended the same social events created their own brand of elitism. A new group of concerned middling men sought recognition by state and city authorities. One path to respectability emerged when some of them initiated a campaign to rid London of crime and immoral behavior. The resulting Societies for the Reformation of Manners stepped up voluntarily and sought ways to implement royal orders issued in the late 17th and early 18th centuries by Queen Mary II, King William III, and Queen Anne. These proclamations called for city cooperation to prevent vicious, debauched, and profane persons from practicing blasphemy, profane swearing, cursing, drunkenness, lewdness, breaking the Sabbath, and other dissolute, immoral, or disorderly practices. In response, enthusiastic middling reformers gathered together and organized a vigilante police force, targeting the most disorderly spaces and people they could find in London, which of course included the city's notorious fairs. Unsurprisingly, this first coordinated effort to rid London of disorderly urban festivals originated in the 1690s, just after the end of the 9 Years' War between France and England. After the Treaty of Ryswick in 1697, the British Navy discharged around 15,000 sailors within a few months, most of them near London. These men, looking for work and probably some entertainment, flooded the city. Many did not find jobs, leaving thousands of young, unemployed men contributing to the stress on a city already struggling with overpopulation and a troubled economy. Rising prices, heavy taxation, and a series of poor harvests added to the hardship. Despite these economic challenges, migration to London continued, fueled by the persecution of Protestants in France and the promise of work in one of Europe's largest cities. This expanding young population became most noticeably unruly during the summer festivities of London's fairs, and the city's urban reformers decided to take on the challenge of controlling the crowds they deemed too rowdy and unmannered. In 1698, these men targeted the great swearers and cursers who frequented Bartholomew Fair, one of England's largest and best-known fairs, held in late August. The self-appointed reformers gathered constables, issued warrants for disorderly people, and descended upon the Smithfield Fairgrounds. These men positioned themselves in various parts of the fair and apprehended a great number of persons for profane cursing and swearing. Many were put in the Bartholomew Close stocks, where, according to a later publication, some thousands of people came to see them. A great many lewd women, however, were not shamed this publicly. Instead, they were taken to Bridewell, a prison for women suspected of being sex workers. The Societies for the Reformation of Manners were motivated by sermons and writings delivered by enthusiastic, reform-minded Anglican priests who rallied them into action with Bible verses about their duty to uphold godly behavior in the city. It became clear, however, that direct efforts to control festivity would be difficult, if not impossible. In 1702, a special force of constables was sent to control the crowds gathering at Mayfair. Reports say that the constables were powerless against a riot of 30 persons with drawn swords, and the mob wielding stones and dirt. One constable, John Cooper, was killed in the fighting, and 8 other people were injured. In later efforts to suppress Mayfair, constables were dragged through a horse pond or chased out of the grounds. When city authorities were powerless, the men who joined the Reformation of Manners campaign sought not only to assist urban authorities, but also to model new sorts of polite behavior they hoped some younger men would emulate. Soon, a pamphlet campaign began, and stories proliferated in the city's many newspapers, books, and magazines. These stories both mocked some of the more popular fair entertainments for being unmannered and barbaric, and satirized the people who attended fairs, making readers curious yet fearful of the rougher aspects of fair-going, the potentially deadly food, the gambling, the dark passages where immoral people hid, the permanent damage to reputations, and the resulting financial ruin or sexually transmitted diseases. While this campaign to impose manners didn't immediately end public festivity in London, it did eventually create new ideas about appropriate urban entertainment and commerce. These reform efforts also led to the establishment of an official city police force and the regulation and abolition of several of the city's most disorderly festivals. And what happened to the former fairgrounds? Not unexpectedly, many became the most fashionable residential neighborhoods in London, as the rights to hold fairs were slowly surrendered for the lucrative alternative of urban development.